Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to take a look at a couple of books that I would absolutely not pick up right now. And this video is going to be a little different from some of the others because most of the books that we're going to look at do not have very large census counts. And this is important, I think, because of the questions that I get from people about census counts and the correlation to demand, to price, to interest, to whether they get those books graded or not. I think this is an important sector, if you will, to kind of examine. The very first book that we're going to look at is this one right here. It is Spectre issue number 54. And this is the first appearance of the second Mr. Terrific, and this book is on people's radar right now because an actor has been selected to portray Mr. Terrific in the upcoming Superman Legacy movie coming out from the DCU. And here it is right here. Not the best cover in the world, but definitely a cool character. Who did the cover? I don't even know if I can see that. Yeah, it doesn't tell me who exactly did the cover. I'm guessing one of these people right here that did it. But you can see that there are only 117 total universal copies of this book out there. A total of 189 overall, if you include the signature series and the qualified books. But as you drill down, you can see that there's not a ton of copies. 9.8, there are only 75 copies of this book. There have been roughly 40 sales. And if we go ahead and click on this and go a little bit deeper, we can see what the data is showing us. And you can see here a pronounced uptick with the graph on the left, a pronounced uptick in the value of this book as of late. It has an average 30-day average of $716. That is well above the one-year average of just $525 and also greater than the 90-day average. You can see here on the far side, if I scroll over a little bit, the high mark for this book has been $1,000. At some point, someone paid $1,000 for this book. That is the high water mark. The most recent sale was on Heritage for $432. You can see that on 712. A couple of best offers, which don't have a lot of transparency there, but you can assume those sold. We'd have to dig into Terapeak on eBay to confirm. But here is that sale back on 711. Someone paid $1,000 for this book, which is probably why that uptick is so pronounced right here. This again is a good book, good character. Now might not necessarily be the time. There could be people out there that are like, well, you know, if I can get a good deal on a raw book, should I do it? Well, yeah, I mean, it depends upon the raw book and the price, but potentially those raw books will also be pushed up in terms of what they're being offered for because of the news and excitement surrounding this character. Another big question would be, if you do have a copy, do you send it in to be graded? Well, maybe you do, right? I think you have to ask yourself, what is the long-term, well, what is the grade? What is the potential grade of the book? And what is the long-term value of that comic, right? If you send it in now and it takes 3 months to come back or a month and a half, whatever the current turnaround time is, that's great, right? The book is there, but then what's going to happen the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next 2 years? What is going to happen with the value of that book? You have to ask yourself, and you have to, ask and answer those tough questions to determine if this is a book you want to pick up, if it's one you want to get graded, or if it's one you just want to stay away from entirely. I will tell you, I have 2 copies of this in the collection right now. I haven't sent them in to be graded. I don't think either would come back at a 9.8, but if they could, that might not be a bad book to send in to be graded, to turn around and sell it, to be honest with you. Buying now, maybe not the best time, but again, you guys will have to make that decision for yourselves. All right, so that's the first book that I wanted to look at. The second book that I want to look at, it is this book right here. It just makes me chuckle every time I think about it. Biker Mice from Mars issue number 1. This book is from 1993, and this book has suddenly gotten hot. This book has suddenly gotten hot because Ryan Reynolds made it known that he was going to co-produce an animated reboot of this series. And so I think people are feeling very nostalgic, and that's probably why there has been a 400% increase week over week in raw sales for this book. A lot of people heard that news and immediately went out and started buying it. and it is increased 400% week over week for raw sales. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the video, there are not a ton of graded copies out there. There are only 81 graded copies of this comic by CGC. And you can see that here. Only 17 of them are 9.8s, which has an FMV of $110. But let's go ahead and click on this one. And you can see that the last sale for this book was back in May for $102. There was a couple of best offers here. I don't quite know what those best offers are. I would have to dig into that to see whether we can figure that out, whether one, they actually sold, and two, how much they sold for. But there was a sale here, $726, and also on $728. We'll have to see whether we can find that data to know what happened specifically with those two books. But again, this could be a book that you potentially want to stay away from now. Just because Ryan has said that he was going to do it doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. And potentially this book's value, once we dig into those last two sales, may be north of what you actually want to pay right now. Maybe you have this book raw in the collection. Maybe you put it from a poly into a mylar and you call it a day. But potentially this is a book that you do not want to pick up right now. And again, you guys will have to make that decision for yourselves. Another book that I would not pick up right now, that I would stay away from, is a Daredevil book. This one is Daredevil issue number 11, specifically volume 5. There have been a lot of volumes of Daredevil, so I think it's important to call that out. This one was published back in September of 2016. And like many of the other books, there are not a ton of copies out there. There are a total of 21 graded copies, 13 of which are universal blue labels. The balance are signature series and one verified copy. There are only 8 9.8s out there. Not a ton of copies out there, but you can see what the most recent sale for this book was on 7/12 for $120. And make that a little bit bigger so you guys can see that. The sale prior to that was in February for $80. And so again, we might see an uptick in people actually submitting this book in as the news starts to spread that this is the first appearance of Muse, and potentially Muse will be the villain that is actually seen in the Daredevil Disney Plus series that we will see at some point in the future. You could see an uptick in submissions into CGC for grading, and as a result of that, an uptick in the sales that take place for graded copies. And as well as the price. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. Cool cover for this book. I do enjoy this one, but again, another book that I would potentially stay away from. Maybe you're able to pick it up raw for just a couple of bucks, but as I alluded to, potentially people are charging more money for that book raw versus where it was just a couple of weeks ago. And again, the fact that there are very few copies of this book on the census is not necessarily an indication that this is a valuable book. That's what a lot of people assume when they see really low census counts. The truth is, as a book gets more expensive, it makes more sense for people to actually get that comic graded. And the reason why we don't see a ton on the census probably is because the raw value of this book and the graded value of this book have been low because there just hasn't been a reason for people to invest into it. As a result of the news, you might see, as I mentioned, an influx of books, and as a result, a corresponding uptick in prices. So the very last one that I want to touch on, I think is a really cool one. This one has zero data. This has zero data, but is a really cool book. Transformers are hot again. They are hot again, and the Transformers Ash Can that was released at San Diego Comic-Con, both the color and black and white version are incredibly hot right now. If you go to eBay and you look at sold items, you will see that this is selling for a healthy amount of money. And I think it's probably happening because of Void Rivals, which is a really good read, as well as potentially people looking at the movie that recently came out, which I watched, and it was one of the better movies from Transformers that I've seen in the last couple of years. Transformers is great IP, no doubt about it, but this Ash Can, I've seen it going for more than $100. I think I saw one for like $189. This again is not a book that I would touch right now in raw format. And as I mentioned, there aren't any graded just yet, but potentially we could see some of the raw copies flow into CGC for grading, and ultimately we will see that data appear here in the census, and then ultimately in the Go Collect pricing guide. But again, there's zero graded right now, and as a result of that, zero sales. So there you have it. Just a couple of books that were, on my mind that I wanted to flag for you guys that I potentially would stay away from right now. At the end of the day, your collection, your budget, your decision, do what makes sense for you. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I want to invite you to do so now. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a comment behind, give the video a thumbs up. And if you want to reach out to me, you can do that on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.
This thing on? Mic check. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me clearly. Yo, should you practice art, or should art be your practice? I had a question, so I asked it. Not to anyone specifically, but to my inner God, the one that's gonna be a master, the one that's more than a rapper, the one that's an educator, the one that seeks enlightenment. He travels with concepts, he's got the mindset expansive. He understands that his time combined with travel and concepts makes his mind convex. Sort of like when you look at a brain scan, straight off meditation, we was concaving until we had that eternal dialogue that created our dialect. Now we in distinct rooms of pure souls having them conversations, synergy and combinations. You fly and we waiting, Indian style in the gold.